We'll get started with the Finance Committee meeting. So I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. David, are there any public speakers?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have two public speakers today. The first speaker is Murray Bowden, followed by Jason Pinero. Please limit your comments to 2 minutes. Thank you.
At the 4 meetings this morning, the issue of diversity and culture was very adequately discussed by members of the board, and I'm sure they will continue the discussion here. On a personal note, at the direction of the New Jersey Commissioner of Transportation, I am working to assist the state of New Jersey to be more safely compliant with the Federal Highway Administration Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. New Jersey has recognized that some of the issues involving roads, signs, railroad crossings have been not in compliance. I am working with Kevin Dunn, who comes from Washington, spent 15 years on the team that oversaw the manual. And for the last 5 years, he's been in New Jersey at the Turnpike, and he is recently being appointed the Director of Operations for both the Turnpike and the Garden State Parkway. I know Kevin for maybe 15 years, 10 in Washington, and I've been in discussions with him ever since he's gotten to the Turnpike, and we're in agreement that there are significant issues that can be addressed and brought into more safety compliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. The second and final speaker is Jason Pinero.
Good afternoon, Larry and Bob. It is a wonderful day for me as an Amazon employee, seeing that my company, the company that I work for, decided to establish its headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, of every single neighborhood in the city of New York. But we need to invest more in transportation. And that is and was one of the criteria that Amazon took into consideration regarding selecting its headquarters. We need to invest more in infrastructure. We need to update our system to the 21st century and to attract more than 25,000 potential Amazon employees to Long Island City. So, Bob, I hope that you do the correct budgeting without taking us into a hole more deeper than we are right now. And we hope that 10 years from now, we could see the product of our work. So that's all I have to say for this month.
Thank you, Mr. Pinero. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the public speaking session.
Thank you. Next, we have the approval of the October 22nd minutes. So may I have a motion? Second? All those in favor? Minutes are approved. David, can you take us through the work plan?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. There's one change to the work plan for November. The charter review was removed because the Corporate Governance Committee and the full board completed the annual review of all charters in March 2018. The review of charters is only required annually. The next item is Budget Watch. There is no Budget Watch in November. On Thursday, Bob Foran will present to the joint session of the Finance Committee and the full board the 2019 final proposed budget, November financial plan 2019 to 2022. The next item is Finance Watch, and Pat McCoy is here. Finance Watch can be found on page 20.
Okay. Good afternoon. I won't go through all these transactions, but it's safe to say we've been fairly busy in finance. keeping our variable rate bond program running, and you'll see a number of transactions that describe necessary remarketings and replacement of existing banks providing letters of credit with new banks providing letters of credit. As you know, we do that on an annual basis. We solicit the bank community for their pricing and capacity, and that effectively means that in the year we'll have to touch some of those up and replace some exiting banks with new banks, and that's what you see here described. And we have a couple more that we'll be doing before the end of the year. Lastly, we have a report on our monthly diesel fuel hedge, which was executed on October 30th. This was competitively bid, 2.8 million gallons of ULSD, and the winning price was provided by Cargill, $2.24 per gallon. Happy to take any questions on that or any of the other matters you see in Finance Watch. Okay, thank you.
Next, we move on to MTA HQ and all agency items. There are 2 action items. The first, starting on page 32, is the law firm panel edition. Board approval is being requested for the retention of the law firm Skadden, Arp, Slate, Mager & Flom, LLP, the firm, effective August 15, 2018, and the addition of the firm to the panel of board-approved outside counsel. Tom Quigley is here to take any questions. Okay.
If there are no questions, I think we need a motion. We have a motion? Second? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion carried.
The second action item on page 34 is to obtain board approval for an amendment to the MTA Alt-Agency Investment Guidelines as related to commercial paper investments. Josie Ancodio is here to answer any questions.
If there are no questions, can I have a motion? Second? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried.
Next, we move on to HQ and all agency items. There are 2 reports and information items. The first item on page 47 is an update on the Business Service Center, and Wael Hibri will present it. The presentation can be found on Director's Desk, Exhibit Book, and on the MTA website at mta.info.
Great. Thank you, David. The BSC has included an operational update on our scope, workload, and projects. It's an informational report posted on both Director's Desk and the MTA website. There's been a great deal of interest in procurement as our most recent consolidation. I'd like to highlight 2 key performance measures. Slide 7 from the deck depicts the higher throughputs and velocity we've achieved as we continue to mature the procurement service model. In the first 9 months of 2017, most of our procurement activity was manual. That's the red bar on the chart. We have transitioned that to PeopleSoft automated sourcing events, which rose from 383, which is 442 on the left side, up to 3,182 on the right-hand side. From a procurement velocity point of view, those are the 2 bars on the right. It used to take the BSC 84 days to complete a purchase order, and now we're able to complete the same amount of work in 39 days. This is an average across all purchase orders, small, medium, and large. Furthermore, we developed 2 reports to help agency chief procurement officers minimize contract extensions for time and value. They serve as an 18-month look ahead for CPOs. These reports run against contract and PO data in PeopleSoft and provide actionable information. At last year's update, I promised to compare our performance to other peer service centers. During the last 90 days, we've worked with Hackett to perform this benchmark, and I'd like to turn over the presentation to Patty Miller of Hackett, who's sitting to my right, who as Senior Director and Project Manager has partnered with us on this initiative.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you today. I've had the pleasure of sitting through some of the other committee meetings, so hopefully I'm prepared for some of the questions that you might have for me today. I think we've got a lot of information here to share with you. This was a project that we spent several months on, and the purpose basically was to look at the performance level currently of the Business Service Center. And we looked at some measures of efficiency and effectiveness. What you see here is the list of the different towers or processes that we took a look at. A couple of pieces of information for you in addition to just the names of those processes here. We did look at information generally on a 12-month basis. So we were looking at the time period from June of 2017 through May of 2018. And we looked at costs of things, how many people it takes to do things. We looked at effectiveness measures like best practices and volumes of activity in the service centers. And so we looked across all of these towers for opportunities for improvement and also for areas where we might already be doing well that we want to protect that good performance so far. Okay. We did make some overall observations across the service center. So these kind of are things that we saw, whether we were talking about one tower in the service center or another. These were things that were fairly consistent. So when we looked at kind of an overall overview, we see that the BSC has really been working hard to meet the business needs. There are some things that are part of your business reality that create some challenges for them. So it is a reality that you've got several different collective bargaining agreements, that each of those may be slightly different, and that means it's difficult to come to standardization of some processes and activities that need to be done within the center. It's also true that you're located in New York City, and there are certain realities about the cost of resources to do the work in the Business Service Center that may not be similar to other organizations that might be able to pull a lever to do some of that work in a different location. And so that's some of what we saw. We did 3 different kind of inputs to the collection of information that we looked at. Part of it was having people inside the service center answer some questions about, as I mentioned earlier, the volumes of activity, the best practices that are in use, and the numbers of people and the cost to perform these processes. We also talked to a number of executives, both inside and outside the service center, about performance and challenges that they see. And the third thing that we did was to contact employees and managers who had recently, in the past 6 months, contacted the service center for some kind of a transaction or issue. And we sent them a short survey asking them for some input about the performance that they experienced from the service center. So we took all of those inputs. And one of the things that we did here was recognition of the BSC management currently to look at improvement opportunities and ways to make things even a little bit better. We also saw that there is a general lack of clarity about what the service center is supposed to do, so what's supposed to be getting done inside that organizational structure versus some other places. So we had different folks who had very different ideas in some cases about how that should work. When we looked at the cost and staffing in general, across all of the towers, the numbers of staff doing the work there is lower than what we see in comparison organizations with similar kinds of shared service centers. The worker to supervisor ratio at your BSC is actually higher in most processes, meaning that you have more people reporting to each individual manager. And when we look at the IT tower specifically, we noted that there are, again, generally less people in the IT tower, but more of the work there is being done by contractors. And so there's still some in the transition to that IT tower. I think there's still some residual contractor staff that are doing work there that they have not been able to deal with yet. And then in a lot of the towers, we heard about specific individuals who have great knowledge and very extensive information about how things get done, but concern about whether or not there's what I'll call bench strength. So whether or not there are other people or multiple people within the service center who have that same level of experience, or that we have a way to train other people to have that same level of knowledge, so that in the event of people leaving the organization, that we don't lose all that history and information. So there's not necessarily standardized processes for all the agencies. There's not necessarily standardized ways of doing things and procedures. Things aren't necessarily documented right now in terms of the steps that one should take for different kinds of issues and transactions that need to happen. On the technology side, you do have a standardized platform in PeopleSoft, but there's also a number of other platforms or software that log into or link into PeopleSoft. And so those, again, may be different by agency or by different kind of process. And that creates some complexity for your IT group in trying to make sure that everything continues to work together. We also saw that you've got a number of manual processes where, in fact, a manager or an employee may have an opportunity to go online and get a form, and it may be a form that they can fill out on the computer, but then they either have to print it out or email it to somebody in the Business Service Center, who then has to manually enter that same information into your system to get it officially in there, rather than having it go directly from the initial person requesting directly into the system. So we're creating some extra steps there that probably will have some impact on efficiency in the longer term. The other thing right in that one is around, you don't have a knowledge management system I mentioned a minute ago. So there's no way to make sure that as a transaction is happening, that everybody in the BSC has exactly the same steps in mind that need to be followed and exactly the same procedures are getting done in every single transaction. Then in terms of best practices and an assessment of the way that we're utilizing best practices today, there have been improvements noted in some areas, most notably in the general ledger close. I believe at the beginning when we started the process, they were talking about 11 days to a close, and now I believe they're at 9 or maybe even 8 now. So there have certainly been areas where we've made significant improvements already in some of the best practices. There's still in some cases, and that one is an example where I've been told we've gotten a lot better, but we still see more opportunity there for continued improvement. Again, when we look across the towers and the CMC, we've still got manual transactional processes that are challenging efficiency, challenging timeliness. We've also got some gaps, as I mentioned, about the within the BSC resources in terms of their level of knowledge, their level of training, and what we might be able to do to make things easier to bring new people on board as that's necessary, and get them trained and up to speed pretty quickly and make sure we've got consistency across the processes. On the last area there around stakeholder perception, as I mentioned, we did look at, across, actually I think we invited 6,000, close to 6,000 people for that stakeholder survey portion, and we had, I believe, a 19% response rate, which I thought was very good. I've done a lot of benchmarking with public sector organizations and state governments, and the response rate that I'm used to seeing is somewhere more around 14%. So your response rate was pretty good, and we did get information about all of the different towers. We did again see gaps in customer service orientation. We did see some complaints about lack of follow-up. So people may have called in or requested a particular transaction or submitted an issue for some kind of resolution, and they weren't aware whether or not it had ever been resolved, which creates some churn and some additional activity, particularly for the CMC, when they call back again because they haven't been notified whether or not their issue has been resolved. So that's an opportunity there. And then, again, the inconsistent quality and completeness of some of the transactions. So it's not clear to us right now whether the inconsistency is just because people aren't sure what happened with their transaction, or if it's that the transactions, in fact, didn't get completed. And it's probably some of both. Okay? So there are some pages in here, and just so that we're aware what we're looking at on the screen, you'll notice you see the numbers there for MTA. You do not see the numbers there for the comparison groups. Those of you on the committee have a document that shows you the numbers for all the comparison groups, and that's simply to protect the proprietary database that Hackett uses to create these comparisons. So you'll see here with accounts payable in all of the metrics related to the number of staff, the cost, those are all positive, where we're doing better than the comparison groups in terms of our performance today. We've got fewer people. It's lower cost for us to provide those transactions. The ones at the bottom are where we have some opportunity. So our percentage of suppliers that are submitting invoices electronically is at 7%. When we look at the percentage of invoices based on the value of those invoices, the dollar amount of those invoices, we're actually lower than the peer group comparison that's being shown there. So there is some opportunity to have more electronic submission and dealing with invoices that way. It is taking a little bit longer. We're at 8 days to process a particular invoice, and we do have a higher rate of examples of transactions that require some kind of correction. The correction isn't meant to place blame on anybody. It's really just to say, how many cases are there where we have to spend additional time on a transaction where we might not have had to do that if it had been done completely and correctly the first time around. Okay, so that's accounts payable. When we look at payroll, payroll looks very positive. We've got lower number of staff. We've got higher productivity, meaning higher on the far right there, the more paychecks produced per FTE that's doing that work, FTE meaning full-time equivalent. In the bottom left there, the cost is lower per paycheck. So we're only spending $1.87. That's significantly lower than particularly the public peers that we see. There is a higher error rate. Again, error rate just means we had to go back and make some kind of a correction later on and deal with that transaction more than once. It is typical or common with payroll that some of that error rate in payroll can be the effect of upstream things like time collection. So if there's a problem in time collection, it could very well have an impact on the payment that's actually made to the employee and then has to come up with a correction later on. In terms of the HRIS process, again, you'll see the numbers of staff that we're using there is lower. The automation that was reported is very high, and our cost there is also lower. You'll notice the error rate here looks very high, but just wanted to clarify that gray box that you'll see there clarifies that that's really the percentage when we're looking at all sorts of things that would impact the work that's done in the HRIS group around employee data. Not that that number of transactions, that number of errors is happening within the BSC, but those are the errors that are impacting the work that they do in the BSC. And then the next one is looking at IT. So again, we've got fewer staff. We've got a pretty high span of control, that worker to supervisor ratio. There are a couple of processes at the bottom there where you'll see our costs are a little bit lower around application development and deployment, but a bit higher around data center management. So there are some areas here potentially of opportunity. And if you look at the top left bar there, that even though we've got fewer FTEs, you'll notice there's a difference in the proportions on that bar. The green part of the bar is build, meaning we're building new things that the business needs to perform better. And the blue is running things. So basically keeping the lights on, keeping the IT resources available to the organization. So you can see we're looking at BSC, and you're pretty much 50-50 between those two different types of activities, where the peer group and the public peer are more likely to have more people in that run kind of category. Okay. From the contact center specifically, so the CMC, the productivity measures are similar to the peer, but our cost is higher. So a big part of that cost being higher is simply where you are located. So that's why we mentioned that earlier as one of the kind of overriding things that impacts your work here and the cost here. But you can see that they're much lower in the top chart there in terms of the numbers of people doing that kind of work, and they're also higher in terms of the number of contacts that each person handles on an annual basis. Okay. This is from the stakeholder survey. So these show the averages. So people were asked about these different areas related to all of the different towers. So we looked at their overall satisfaction with each area. So the CMC, accounts payable, each one was the CMC, everyone was asked to respond about. And then the others, they were asked based on those that they had specific interaction with. And you can see the blue parts in the middle show the average across all the people who responded on a 1 through 10 scale, 10 being the best, we're really happy, 1 being we're not happy at all. So you can see that most of them are around 6, a little over 6, up to, I think the highest one is 7.29. And then on the right-hand side of that slide, you can see the percentages of people who responded in different categories. So we really looked at 9s and 10s as promoters, that's what's in the orange. We looked at 7s and 8s as people who were generally happy, and that's the green part of the bar, and then detractors in the gray part are people who really weren't getting the level of service that they want. So basically that was anybody that rated us as a 6 or below. Okay. So as a result of all of that information, we went through and looked at what potentially could the BSC consider in terms of improvements. So these are all recommendations that Hackett made, which the BSC will need to take a look at and make some decisions about what direction they want to take and which of these they want to look at, whether or not they've already got some other initiatives in play right now that might have an impact on some of these areas. So we really looked at these items specifically because they had something to do with, across the different towers. They had some impact over multiple towers. We also provided recommendations for each of the individual towers more specific to the areas that they cover. But these are really cross-tower kinds of things. So we're looking at, again, talent management strategy, making sure that we've got the skills in the BSC that we need moving forward, looking at some kind of a knowledge management system or approach, making sure that we can drive consistency in how transactions and issues are handled, make sure that we've got documentation of procedures, again, to drive consistency and to assist with knowledge of the resources in the BSC and to better enable training of new folks. We talked about broadening some of the CMC training and knowledge, that there may be things that are currently pushed to the individual towers that could be handled by the CMC if they had some appropriate training and help in learning about what those topics are. And then also looking at evaluating and improving the customer service orientation of the BSC and looking at developing a specific customer satisfaction survey, perhaps something like what we did with this survey that we did here, but on a more frequent basis. And then continuing to evaluate technologies and helping to automate the highly manual and rules-based processes, get rid of some of the manual transactions wherever possible.
Thank you, Patty. So taking these recommendations, we are already working on a reply through our Siebel to our customers to see if the responses we have given them are adequate and complete. But we also need to build a knowledge management database so our new employees are working from the same base of knowledge as our more experienced people, and that would be something that we need to fund as well. We're looking at two tools that will minimize re-entry of data. One is e-benefits, so if there's a new member in the family or there's a change in family status, employees can log onto the portal and make those changes, and they circulate in the system and finally get reflected in their benefit plans. Again, that will minimize data re-entry. And we're also evaluating e-settlements. We are very low on electronic invoices. We are introducing error rates because we take a look at a scanned invoice and we try to match it manually. E-settlements will have our vendors submit their electronic invoices directly into PeopleSoft, where we can match them automatically and issue payment more efficiently. And world-class performance organizations are doing more e-settlement work. So this concludes our report, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of information. We apologize it took a long time, but we're happy to answer any questions you have. Yeah.
Veronica?
With regards to cost savings and or efficiencies for the IT tower, do you have an opinion as to the greater use of contractors in the IT tower?
So I think generally, when you're using contractors, I generally expect that they will be a little bit more costly. So you have to look at the benefit of those resources. Do those resources have some special purpose because they have some kind of knowledge that you don't need or want to have on a long-term basis? So you just want to make sure, I think, that as you're using contractors, that you're using them for the right purpose. If you're just plugging them into open spaces, that's when you may be spending more money for a resource that has greater skill levels or different skill levels than what you might need in the long term.
So one is I want to thank you and commend you for the progress that you've made, because obviously last time you were here, I was a little critical of some of the things that you reported on that I just thought was unsatisfactory. And while we still have a ways to go, you've certainly put us on the right trajectory to getting there. There's two things, again, that I just want to personally mention to you. One is we got to work on getting the error rate down. Mm-hmm. I understand that's a challenge because of from a staffing perspective, but with the financial situation that the agency's in, we're going to have to find a balance between trying to get the proper staffing, but we cannot just use that as a rationale for having as high an error rate, because that's costly in many different ways. And the other thing that I kind of struck me is with the accounts payable thing, the lack of electronic invoices that you're getting from our vendors. I kind of found that to be astonishing, actually, more so than surprising. You know, one of the things that I would ask you to take a look at is just set a policy that if anyone wants to do business with the MTA, they have to submit their invoices electronically. Otherwise, they can't do business with us. There's always some people just maybe don't have, be hard for me to believe in the year of 2018, 19, that no one has a computer and they can't send an invoice electronically. But for those, then there can be an exception. You grant them a waiver. But 95% or more of our vendors that we do business with should be able to send you an electronic invoice. And I just think sooner rather than later, you just set the policy. It's mandatory for everyone. And if you don't do it, then we're not contracting with you. You'll get pretty much near compliance, and it shouldn't take 3 months, 4 months, or 6 months to get it done. You could probably do it, tell them effective January 1st. This is the new policy, and if you can't somehow manage to do it, then come and tell us, and we'll give you a waiver, or we'll give you a grace period to get up to speed. But that burden should not be placed on the agency. There's a cost factor, there's a time factor, and it probably falls into the error rate somewhere too.
It does.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
The second item is the station maintenance receivable update for the period April of 2017 through March of 2018, and can be found on pages 48 to 50. Patrick Kane is here if there are any questions.
The obvious question is, when is Nassau County going to pay?
It's only short $21,000. It's paper clips.
I'm going to let Pat answer that one.
You know, my understanding is the county executive is fully aware of the $21,000 deficit, and that she's working on having that $21,000 paid to the MTA. And I have every confidence that County Executive Kern will get that.
It's on the agenda for the next county legislature.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have David Ross with procurements for MTA headquarters and the agencies.
Thank you. So for headquarters, there are 5 non-competitive procurement actions totaling $3,514,227. There's a non-competitive contract award to the National Industries for the Blind, the preferred source vendor for the purchase of safety gloves, in the amount of $544,058. There are 4 non-competitive actions for a total of about $3 million. 3 extend and add funding to contracts for graphic design and printing services for a total of $251,000. These actions will provide for continuity of services while replacement contracts are procured. And the 4th action is an additional service work order with IBM for $2.7 million. This action provides for a refurbished mainframe associated with software and services that will assure higher availability for AFC MetroCard debit credit functionality when the current mainframe requires maintenance or fails. I should add on that particular item that you may remember at a recent board meeting, we extended the IBM contract for the data center out to May of this year. We are in the latter stages of a procurement through which we will enter into a new contract for mainframe services. That contract anticipates having 2 mainframes as well. So it may seem odd that we're adding a mainframe to a contract at the tail end of the contract, but it's really not, because the intent is to move forward with 2 mainframes rather than 1. And the new contract anticipates that. Anyway, those are the first set of items.
Are there any questions? Have a motion? Second? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried.
So there are no items for Metro North, and there are no items for Long Island Railroad. So next we have New York City Transit. There's one competitive procurement action totaling $5,798,000 requesting a change order for EE Cruising Company for the installation of 34 trackside steel girders at 3 stations in Queens that were furnished under a prior modification.
Any questions? Can I have a motion, please? Second? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried.
Bridges and Tunnels is proposing awards of 2 competitive design build services contracts totaling $47 billion. Both are with EJ Electric Installation Company. One is for $29 million to rehabilitate tunnel control and communication systems at the U-Carry Tunnel and Queens Midtown Tunnels. The second is for $18 million to install fire alarm and smoke detector systems at the pump rooms, ventilation, exhaust, and service buildings for the same tunnels.
Any questions? Motion, please. Second? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried.
There are no items for FemTech, so this concludes the procurements. Back to David.
The MTA consolidated financial and operational reports are on pages 66 to 119. Next is David Florio with real estate.
Thank you, David. We have 7 action items for your consideration. The first 2 with Metro North, a permit with Premium Outlet Partners for use of parking spaces at the Harriman Station over the Thanksgiving Day weekend. The second is a lease with Leather Spa GCT for a shoe repair and shoe shine facility in the Gray Bar Passageway in Grand Central. The next 2 with Long Island Railroad, both are agreements with Boingo Wireless, one for provision of wireless and cellular service in East Side Access, the second for the same service in the Atlantic Branch right-of-way Atlantic Terminal in Jamaica. For New York City Transit, we have a lease agreement for retail at the Myrtle Wyckoff Station in Brooklyn. And lastly, for the MTA, we have 2 items. One is the exercise of option to purchase Grand Central Terminal and the Harlem Hudson lines. And the last is a single source procurement with Boston Properties to facilitate the demolition of the MTA's former headquarters on Madison Avenue. Happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Can I have a motion? Second? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Guess we're finished, right?
We're all
All
done
right.
with the agenda, Mr.
So
Chairman.
we need a motion to adjourn the meeting then? Second? All those in favor, I'm sure, is aye. The meeting is adjourned.